when you want to do just a quick edit with Mylio Photos, we've got some great tools in there that can help you make your photos look good. Right now, you might notice things look a little bit different. If you've been coming to Coffee Break the last couple of weeks, you're getting a sneak preview of Mylio Photos 22.2, which is our release that's going to be coming in the next few weeks. So what I want to do today is I'm going to use one of our quick filters and jump down here, and I've got an album that I created just for today's editing demo. And that allows me to jump to an album really quickly, and I haven't left the all photos view. So that's kind of fun. Give you a little peek at what we have going. So I'm going to jump in and open up one of these pictures in single photo view, and then click on the edit icon here. This opens up the edit panel, and this image is already edited. And I want to take a quick moment here just to show you the before and the after. It's a very subtle edit. And one of the beautiful things about editing in Mylio Photos is it's completely non-destructive. So what I can do is click this reset button, and it takes me back to my full image like I never did anything. So you can test things out and get an idea of maybe where you want to go with a photo without having to make any big commitments. So let's start off by working a little bit with the tools that we have here. Starting top to bottom, we have our histogram. And what this is a graphical representation of where your tones fall between dark and light. On the left side, you have pure black. On the right side, you have pure white. And then everything else is in between. If you click these little buttons here, so let's go ahead and click that one, click the one here, this is going to show your shadow and highlight clipping. And you'll notice that we have a little bit of a blue overlay here on the bottom. That's that shadow clipping. And if there was any highlight clipping, it would show up in red. What that means is I've lost some detail in that area, meaning that in that black area, there's no detail left. And if there was that red overlay, that would mean I completely lost detail in those whites. Now, a quick and easy way to show and hide this is to use the J key on the keyboard. And that's going to toggle your clipping warnings on and off. So if you accidentally somehow get these red and blue splotches on your picture and you're not sure where they came from, you might have accidentally hit that J key, and you can just hit the J key again to turn those off. So you can use the histogram to see the tonal balance of your image. And if that kind of bothers you, you want to free up the screen real estate. Let's say you're working on a smaller screen. You can always just collapse that down and you don't have to look at it. Next down, we have our presets. And these are great ways to try out different looks for your pictures. So our first two are the same ones you have here as Auto Enhance and your Auto Color. So you can go ahead and click those here as presets. And then we have a few other ones that are creative, black and whites, different toning that you can go ahead and play with and see what you like. I'm going to go ahead and close those for now, and we're going to focus in on the actual sliders. And you'll see that we have quite a few here to work with. The first off is your white balance. This is the color of the light. So if you've ever noticed on a gray, foggy day, everything looks a little bit more towards the blue, kind of muted tones. Whereas on a warm, sunny day, everything has more of a golden glow to it. And that's that color temperature here, this Kelvin color temperature. So we can move things to look a little bit more blue, like more of a cloudy day, or move them to the right so it looks a little bit warmer, like a bright sunny day. So that's what that does. Tint helps you balance that out. So if you feel like it got a little too green, you can move it more towards the magenta. And if you feel like it has too much magenta in it, you can move it back to bring it more towards the green. With any of these sliders, you can double click that handle, and it's going to take you back to the default. So whatever it was, whatever setting you had when you first imported that image, that's what it's going to pop back to. So any of these sliders, you can change them, play with them, and then double click that handle to put it back to its default. So for this image, I actually liked how that looked to bring it up a little bit more and give it a golden glow. Right about there, I think looks really nice. And then we can start working with our tone. And when we talk about tone, that's going to be your exposure, so your overall brightness of the image. Contrast is going to be the difference between your blacks and your whites. If you drag that contrast slider to the right, that's going to make your blacks more black and your whites more white, so it gives more space and definition between those tones. Highlights is going to work with the brightest tones in your image. Shadows is going to work with the darkest tones in your image. And then whites and blacks are those areas on the very fringes of that histogram, so you have a chance to brighten or darken the whites, brighten or darken the blacks. Clarity is one of my favorite sliders because this gives you what we call mid-tone contrast. and it gives the appearance of extra detail. So by pulling that to the right, you're going to add some detail to your photo. By pulling it to the left, it softens details. Next, we get down into our colors. Vibrance and saturation are very closely related. Saturation affects every single pixel in an image. And if you go ahead and bring that up and drag that to the right, it adds more color to every single pixel. Vibrance, on the other hand, looks at the pixels that are most saturated and adds some extra saturation to the less saturated pixels. So it's kind of like saturation light. It has much more light touch, softer touch with adding additional color than saturation. Saturation is going to be a little bit more in your face and, bam, with that color. We also have the option to stick with our color image, convert it to black and white, or if you're working with scanned film negatives, you can even invert that slide. So before we go any further, let's make a few of these tone and color adjustments to this photo and have a little bit of fun. I'm going to actually pull the exposure down a little bit on this image. I'm going to bring the contrast up, and that's going to give it a little bit more depth and definition, a little bit more drama. Highlights, I think, look pretty good. There's nothing really blocked up in my shadows. I might bring my whites up a little bit just to give that a little bit more brightness, a little bit more definition here. And as I said, I really love clarity. Now you'll notice all of these sliders are affecting every pixel in the image. If you ever want to affect just a single small area, we do have a brush. So what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of clarity here and here, but the rest of the image doesn't need it. So I'm actually going to double click to reset that. Go up to my brush, and you can see I was already using this before, so my clarity is up nice and high. You can use the bracket keys on your keyboard to make that brush size larger or smaller, or use this radius slider here at the bottom. And I'm just going to brush in a little bit of extra clarity right there on that part of the bloom. And that just gives it a little bit more definition while keeping the rest of the image nice and soft. So here I'm going to go ahead and pull up my vibrance a little bit. Not too much. You don't have to be heavy-handed with vibrance and saturation typically. And then we can go down and work with levels. So most people are going to work with either that tone section, or they're going to work with levels. You can certainly do both, but they kind of work hand in hand and do very similar things. This auto button right here is the same as your auto color here at the top, and that's going to do an automatic color correction. It's up to you whether or not you like that color correction, but it does take it to a very neutral spot. I tend to get a little bit more creative with my color. And then you can go ahead and adjust the red, green, and blue channels within your photo individually. So levels is really helpful, especially when you're working with restoring scanned images and older images that might be faded. They might have gotten really bad color casts, things like that. So that's when I would spend the most time with levels. For today, what I want to do is go ahead and skip down, and I want to add a nice soft vignette to this image. But before I do that, I actually want to crop this to give it a little bit better composition. So I'm going to go up here to the top, grab my crop tool, and down here at the bottom, we can change our aspect ratio. And I'm very fond of the 4:5 or 8:10 ratio. Just a very nice way to look at an image. And then I'm going to just pull this in a little bit tighter. I think right about there looks lovely. And now I have my image composed a little bit better. Now I can go down to my vignette, and I can grab the amount slider. And you pull this to the left, you'll see it's darkening the edges. And if you pull it to the right, it brightens the edges. Now, I particularly prefer to darken my edges. My personal taste is that brightening edges tends to give it a very dated look. It's not something I prefer. There's very few instances where brightening the edges really helps, but it's completely up to you and whatever makes you happy. So I'm going to pull this down to the left, and then we're going to make a few more minor adjustments here. You can change the size of that circle, so we can pull that in a little bit tighter. You can change the roundness. This makes it go more oval and go more square. I think more oval actually works really nicely for this. You can adjust the feather, which is that softness and the transition between the dark and light areas. So we'll pull that up nice. And if you need to, you can adjust the rotation so you can turn that oval. I'm going to go ahead and double click that, take that back to neutral. And if you have something that is off center and you want to actually draw the eye into a different area of the photo, you can click on choose subject and click to move the center of that vignette to a different part of the image. I'm going to go ahead and leave that alone for right now. And from here, let's go ahead and add a little bit of sharpening. When you're working with details, I always recommend zooming in to 100%. You can see this image is already fairly sharp, and then adding that clarity earlier, it doesn't need a whole lot, but I'm going to go ahead and drag that sharpening up just a little bit. And you'll see that starts to make all those little edges come alive. I think that might be a little bit too much. We'll back that off. And then we can zoom back out. And I think that image is ready to go. So we can see how far we've come here by clicking the before and the after. What do you guys think? Go ahead and unmute. Would love to know if there's something you'd like to do differently with this image, something you particularly like, something you didn't like. I know it's all very personal and to taste. Any thoughts?
Angela, that looks great. I was wondering if maybe you could go through some of the presets.
Absolutely.
And, show how to save one. That'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's start with that. So let's say we really like this look and we want to apply this to another image. All you need to do is go down to, let's see here, it's actually up here at the top under presets. I don't do this very often, you can see. And you can go ahead and you can actually add your own custom preset. So let's call this Dewy Flower. And you can choose which adjustments to include. So all of the ones that I changed will be included, or you can select all. So what this does is if you already had made a few adjustments to an image, if you select all here and then you apply this preset, it's going to overwrite every other change you made. Whereas if you just do changed ones, let's say that this image, we didn't touch shadows or highlights, but we were editing another image. We did some shadows and highlights. If we only do changed one, it's going to leave those two settings alone and only apply the ones that were changed in this preset. You can also say to include the crop if you change the angle. Typically, you're going to want to leave those off unless you have an entire series of images that all need to be cropped exactly the same. So from there, you can say save. And now we have here our Dewy Flower preset that we can go back and use anytime we want. You can also take those settings down here at the bottom and simply copy them, go to another image and choose paste. And now that's not a great look for this particular photo. It's a very different style photo, but you get the idea that you can go through and you can edit and correct images very, very quickly. So let's go ahead and reset this guy and do a quick edit on here. So for this photo, I'm going to go ahead and let's start with our auto color. And I like this because it just nicely balances out the color and gives you a slightly better starting point. So from here, I'm going to scroll down. And this image is a little bit dark, so I might give it a tiny bit more exposure and a little bit more contrast because I like that more dramatic look. Highlights, I'm going to pull down a little bit to the left because they're a bit bright. Shadows look good. Again, I'm going to add some of that clarity, and that's going to add some nice definition to the image. And I might even come back up here to my white balance and very slightly warm that up. Now, in an image where you have clouds, if you want to add warmth, the thing that I like to look for is you don't want to end up with yellow clouds because it's going to look really unnatural. It's not going to be like a nice warm glow like a sunset would give you. It starts looking artificial. So like if I pull it all the way to the right, it either looks smoky, hazy, smoggy. It's not a great look. So you want to take it just to the part where it looks like a really nice neutral gray in the sky. You can see a little bit of blue sky peeking out here. And I think that's a much better balance. From here, we can go ahead and straighten this out, grab the crop. And if you need to rotate an image, you can grab this slider here at the bottom and just straighten that out. That looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit more this way. When you have skyscrapers like this, it's like a balancing act to decide which verticals you want to straighten off of. So I'm looking at this one here on the left, and that's what I chose to straighten off of. So from here, we can even adjust that crop a little bit, bring that in, maybe right about there. And you can click done at the bottom or hit return. And there we have our edited image. And take a look at our before and our after. And again, you can add this as your own custom preset, or you can copy those adjustments and take that onto another image that's similar. Any questions so far?
I have a question for you, Angela. Do
Sure.
you normally crop to an aspect ratio? I noticed you've done that, but
I do.
do you normally crop that way, or I'm random? I'm pretty random. It depends though.
A lot of times I like to print. So
Yeah.
it depends on how much time I want to spend on something. If I've got time and I'm printing and I want to cut a custom mat, or I'm ready to pay extra to have something custom size printed, that's totally fine. Occasionally I will do that if it means that it's going to be the best absolute composition for that particular image. But in general, I typically stick to custom or standard aspect ratios. So if we go in here into our crop, my favorites are going to be the 8:10, the 2:3, and I'm very fond of 16:9, because this gives you more of like a panoramic look. And then 4:5 is a very classic. It's very easy to find mats and frames for an 8:10 or a 16:20. Same with the 2:3. So those are the ones that I stick with most of the time. And also, if you want to change the orientation of your crop, you can do so right there. At the top, you can see there's a selection for doing a portrait orientation or doing the landscape. I'm going to go ahead and click done. And then I'm just going to do a Command or Control Z to undo that last crop that I did, because I don't want to keep that one. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I suppose in summary, it depends on what you're doing to present your images.
Exactly.
And I've done exactly the same as you. For all the canvases I was doing for sales last year, I had to do it to the format of the canvas that I was selling. However, yesterday I was at an event and there was more, depending on what the scene was, I would adjust it and crop based on that. So yeah, thank you for the answer. That's good. Yeah.
You're very welcome. So John's asking, are these edits done on RAW files or JPEG? Presume RAW, because that gives you more to work with. Typically, I love to work on RAW images, both on my smartphone and on my big cameras. I do shoot in RAW most of the time. So on this particular image, this is a CR3 file. So this is from my Canon R6. That is a RAW file, as is this one. I do have DNG files out of my iPhone, as well as HEIC and JPEGs. You have a lot more editing leeway in editing when you're working with a RAW file, just because there's more data to work with. When you're working on a JPEG, all of these same adjustments can be done. You're just going to have a little bit less room to push an image. Let's say you need to open up shadows or try to get back some detail on those highlights. If the data is not there, it's not going to look as good. And then Michael says, when editing, can you do a batch copy of all the edits and then paste to multiple pictures? Absolutely. So let's go ahead and say I wanted to take this image here, and I'm going to go down here and copy those edits. I can then go back here to my grid view. I can select multiple images and then click paste. And that's going to apply those edits to those all images. Same thing goes if you have created a custom preset. I could select multiple images and apply that preset to everything. So that makes it go nice and fast. All right, one more example here. And this is one that I'd already edited. So there's the before and there's the after. So I'm going to go ahead and click reset on that. And let's go ahead and choose auto color. And I actually kind of like the warm tones that this brings in, but I think it could be a little bit less warm. You can see the background turned almost a little bit blue with that auto color. So we can correct that here by taking our temperature slider and then just moving that a little bit over to the right. And we keep the richness of everything else. And it just adds a little bit more warmth to the image. From here, I want to go down and I want to add a little bit of clarity. And you can see how that's just bringing out some of that wonderful juicy detail of the orange. And we can even kick up that vibrance a tiny bit. And from here, I want to crop this to a square. So we can go into our crop tool, down to our aspect and choose square. And then if you want to adjust that placement, you can just grab, click and drag. So probably right about there. And I might pull in this a little bit more from the right. Hit return on my keyboard. And there we go. If we want to add a vignette now, we can do that as well. And this is a good one where we might want to put the light down here a little bit offset from the center so we can adjust that. So let's first pull this amount slider down to the bottom. And I'm going to make that size really small. Let's change the roundness here to be a little bit more oval. There we go. And I'm going to adjust that rotation a bit here. All right. Now let's grab choose subject, and you can see I have a little dot in the middle of my cursor, and that's going to move the center of that vignette so I can change exactly where that's placed. And when I'm done, click on choose subject again. And then I can go back down to my vignette tool. I have this at -100, which is way too strong, but I use it to help me place where I want the vignette to be. And then I can back it off where it needs to go. From there, I can go ahead and take feather, adjust that feather, make that a little bit lighter. And there we have it. So there's our before, and there's our after. So there's some great stuff you can do just here in Mylio Photos without having to jump to other applications. Now, a lot of times I do jump to other applications because I like to get into the nitty-gritty and I like creative photo editing. But if you're in a hurry or you don't have other applications, you just don't want to bother, use these tools here in Mylio. They are wonderful. They can help you make your pictures look great. And yeah, just have fun with it. All right, any other questions? Let me see if there's anything else here in the chat.
Something worth mentioning, Angela, is in a recent release, you can now edit. You can go to an external editor with or without your Mylio edits, which was
That
really
is a very good point.
feature.
Yes, absolutely. So let's say I wanted to take this picture here and I wanted to do some further edits on this in Photoshop. What I can do is go up to the photo menu, choose open with Photoshop, and it's going to ask me, do I want to edit the original raw or do I want to edit a copy with Mylio adjustments? If I select that option, I can choose which file type I want. And if you're going from a raw file, I highly recommend choosing a TIFF, ProPhoto RGB, and keeping the 16-bit depth. Say continue, and that's going to go ahead and launch that file in Photoshop, and I can continue editing however I like. Let's see here. John says, perhaps a basic photo editing term, but how do presets and LUTs differ? That is a really great question. So a preset is a grouping of different settings on those sliders. So you move the sliders to where you want them, and it basically saves a snapshot of all of those settings. A LUT is a little bit more of an under the hood thing, and the way I understand it, it's for color grading. So it basically assigns certain values to certain lightness and darkness and certain colors and makes modifications that way. So it's a one and done kind of thing. Usually there's some adjustments on a LUT for contrast and saturation and an amount, but you don't have as much granular control, but it does give you some really cool options for making really different, a different look and feel for each of your images. Can Mylio remove unwanted objects? Not at this time. We don't have an erase tool. What we do have here at the top is we do have red eye removal. So if you're scanning in old photos that have red eye, you can remove red eye. We do have our brush tool that lets you apply all of these different adjustments in very localized ways. So that's what we have right now. But if you want to get into removing pixels, that's where you're going to want something like Photoshop, Luminar Neo, On1, Lightroom. Any of those can do it. Any other questions? Lori, any other thoughts?
Yeah, great job, Angela, of course. Great job. What I really like about this editing feature is if you have Mylio Photos installed on your, let's say your phone or your tablet, you can also do editing on your mobile devices, which is really nice as well.
Yeah, that is a great point. So all of these editing tools are also available on your phones and your tablets. And if you make changes on your phone or your tablet to your images, they're going to show on your computer as well. So you don't have to be locked in front of your machine, your computer, to do that wherever you are, and then be able to get some really great results.
Can I ask Angela, it's Darren here again. The differences in the editor with Radiance, obviously Radiance is an editor application. Mm-hmm. Is there much of a difference between them? I haven't looked at Radiant just yet. I'm looking at it and planning to.
I would say, I mean, it's pretty, it has far more features, far more options for editing your photos than something like Mylio does. Mylio has your essential editing tools, but you have a lot more options to get more creative, do more different color toning things. It has some really cool AI tools that can work with faces, so it can recognize a face in an image
Of
and
course.
do like skin corrections and things like that. There's a lot more options in Radiant.
I use Luminary AI. I have. I haven't gone to the newer version yet. Seems to be a lot of bloat and all the extras you can add to it. Let me just say that. So I'm looking at Radiant, and that's why I just asked.
Well, the thing with Radiant, I don't have any of the extras that they have, but I do have the application. So let's go ahead and just open up Radiant here really quick. And let's open the one that I edited. So take those changes that we already did. What's going to happen when you immediately open up Radiant is it's going to improve what I already had.
Yeah.
So here's what Radiant wants us to see. And then here's what I had in Mylio. You can see this looks good.
Yeah.
This looks, it's definitely a little bit brighter. So before and after. And if it's a little bit too much for you, you can go over here to the quick edit and, pull back on that strength a bit and maybe back off the color. And you have some different options here. So I like their depth. That adds a little bit more drama to it. If you go into detailed edit, again, here's all of these different options that we don't have in Mylio. So it does expand your toolkit quite a bit. If you click here on this little person, this is where if there were a face here, it would let you do, enlarge eyes, get rid of dark circles, whiten teeth, all sorts of stuff like that. And then if you go into this color grade area, this is where you actually have access to LUTs, which was what John was mentioning. So you can go in here and do some really cool creative things that you can't do in Mylio. What I do love here is we go ahead and click save, and you go down here, you see this has this underscore display. And this is designed specifically to work with Mylio. So if you use the file name underscore display, that's going to tell Mylio to stack this edited version with your original. So we can go ahead and I'm just going to say this is a JPEG and go ahead and click that over. And that's going to stack that edited JPEG with my TIFF file. Oops, wrong app. There we go. That I created here in Mylio. So if I go over to my info, and I'm going to have to go ahead and take a look at this in the folder it came from.
Yeah.
So here was the original RAW. Here is the TIFF that we created when we exported out of Mylio and our saved JPEG display copy. So I have both versions now side by side.
I recently saw that with Rich the other day, and I wondered how he did that. Now I understand the underscore display gives you that feature of stacking them side by side. That's brilliant. He also, I noticed you've got a series of the same shot. He also did, using the edit, a copy of the changes he made across all of the images, which obviously for bulk editing just is brilliant. Yeah.
Well, that is
sold me on Radiant though anyway, so thank you.
You're welcome. What you can do here, so if you wanted to with Radiant, you can grab a series of images. And let's say I want to edit these all at the same time. I can open them all at once in Radiant. And in this case, let's go ahead and open the RAW. Go ahead and pop that open here, give it a second to load. And you'll see it comes up with a film strip, much like the film strip in Mylio, where you can go across the bottom. You can look at them, edit them one by one, or you can copy any edits you make to one to all of them, and bam, all those edits are done. So it works really, really well. Let's see here. There we go.
Yeah. One thing important to note about that underscore display is it's an intrinsic function in Radiant, but you can do the same thing with any external editor. Absolutely.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's a great point. So if you're using Luminar Neo, you're using On1, anything else that doesn't have a direct plugin or association with Mylio, if you take that file name, the original file name, and add underscore display, and this can be for a JPEG, it can be for a TIFF. You add that underscore display, and that tells Mylio when that file is in the same folder as the original, it stacks them together. So you still have your original there, but you'll see the edited version in Mylio.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right. Any other questions?
I just have a comment, Angela. Your description of LUT versus preset is absolutely the best one I have ever heard. You need to write that down somewhere and save it. Because
Thank you.
a lot of people ask that, and nobody really has good descriptions of it. I mean, even developers of software, I've heard, well, I won't use a name, but very famous person with Neo. He couldn't describe it as well as you just did.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I was kind of
that
like,
was-
okay, how do I best describe this? Like, I mentally understand it, but sometimes getting the words out is not necessarily the same.
I think that's the issue, is it's very hard to describe the difference.
Yes.
It was very good,
Because
though.
they're very similar in concept.
Yep, they are.
Yep. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I want to thank you guys all for joining me today. This has been a lot of fun. And if you've been following Coffee Break for a while, you know that creative photo editing is one of my passions. So it's always a great time when I get to touch on this subject matter. And I also want to thank Lori for joining us today and bringing in some good questions and comments. She's always very, very helpful. So I hope to see you guys around the community, share some photos. If you have any questions, you guys can always find me there. And I will see you next week. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Angela.
Angela.
Bye-bye.
Take care, folks.